Let's talk a little bit about building an effective worship set and leading a band. I remember the first time that I co-built a set with someone I was leading worship with. They had already been leading worship for at least 15 years when I had come on the scene. I had been leading probably about 2 years in this particular context, and we sat down and we began to build the worship set, and I contributed my songs and he put his songs in the mix and he began to shape them. And I saw that he had a container, a pattern that he was starting to think in, that he was putting the songs into. We would top and tail the songs. We'd play the beginning of a song. Then we'd play the end of a song and see how it flowed into the beginning of the next song. He'd begin to shape them according to this progression, and by the time we were done, we had spent 20 minutes, 30 minutes crafting this worship set that we were going to lead for about 40 to 45 minutes that particular evening. This three-step model I have been using now probably for most of my worship leading life. I telescope it. I build a 5-minute worship set around this idea to some degree, or a 15-minute worship set. I've also built 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, full blowout night worship sets around a similar model, just repeated over and over in different ways. I like to see this as a container. It's flexible. It's not one of those things where the jury is in and this is the only way to do it, but it is a pattern that I've found to be effective when I'm thinking about building a worship set. And here are the 3 stages to it. Number 1 is gathering. Number 2 is focus. Number 3 is response, creating a way for them to respond to what's just happened. So let's first talk about gathering, or invocation according to your background. Gathering is that song or songs or that dynamic that makes people feel like when they're coming in on that Sunday morning or that Wednesday night or whenever they're gathering and they're bringing all their fragments of life into that moment, that they can sort of settle in, they can find their way in. I usually don't start a set with a 1, 2, 3, 4, bam, at 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning. I mean, just people aren't there. I try to bridge it. I create a sense of atmosphere that welcomes them in. This is where scriptures and other things can break the ice, can cause people to feel like you're there for them and they're not just there for you to watch the band do their thing that they rehearsed so much. And that takes some sensitivity, because you and the band have been working on this, doing sound check and everything else leading up to it. You're ready to dive in, but others aren't. So a time of gathering. So I think of my gathering song or songs. I think then of my focus time in the set. I call this the celebration time. And I really try to focus in this part of the set on what I'll call God songs. Songs that are focused on the unchanging nature of God. Not so much, God, here's how I feel about you, or here's my reflection on some, doctrine or theological idea in a song. I love those moments when God's songs are packed into the center, where we focus on the nature of God. This is where celebration can rise. It's where things can break loose. There's a wonderful focus on who Jesus is, who God is, on calling out to and a celebration of the Holy Spirit. And then that part of the set gives way, in my mind, to what I call response. These are prayer songs. These are songs of us responding to the nature of God, responding to His unyielding love, responding to the miracles He's done in our lives, the transformations of our heart and mind, the ways that He's using us in our cities and neighborhoods and communities. These are moments when we respond and say, yes, Lord, I'll do justice. I'll love mercy. I'll care for the broken and the weak and the vulnerable in society. I'll say yes again to you conquering my heart and being in charge of my finances and being in charge of my job. I'll give my relationships to you. That response time is so vital for people. Now, when we talk about arranging a band and shaping the sound of a band, we're into a whole nother world. I like to think of 3 principles that can guide us. The first is the fraction principle. The fraction principle, when I'm arranging the sound of the band, comes back to this idea. And it comes from a good friend of mine, a worship leader, Brian Dirksen, wrote, Come now is the time to worship. And the fraction principle says, if there are 7 people in this band, we all get 1/7 of the sound. The sound of the band needs to add up to 1, not 7. And a lot of younger bands or less experienced musicians are trying to make their band sound like it adds up to everyone's number one awesome, right? So the keyboard player's all over it, and they're playing like they're solo, but now they're in a band. And the drummer is doing everything, and the bass player's all over it. Well, what does that sound like? It sounds like a train wreck. It sounds like a wall of sound. It's not pleasing to listen to. It's not disarming. It's something that people feel almost irritated by and can feel. The fraction principle says no. We each get a seventh of the sound. So the electric guitar player is going to do this beautiful single note lead because that's their contribution to the whole sound. The keyboard player is going to do a pad, maybe just play a note or two or a few notes, each measure, just to create space for the inside rhythm of the guitar and the hi-hat. That's going to be built on a foundation of the bass guitar, which locks in with the kick drum and gives the groove, gives the rhythm of the band. Then flutes and other instruments and violins are going to act like another voice. They're going to respond to the physical voices that are singing. The voices that are singing are going to be working to harmonize so they sound like one buzzing unit rather than like many voices all singing with heavy vibrato into a microphone. I always say to my singers when we gather in a circle with no microphones and work on singing a chorus, I say, match me. We want our sound to sound like a buzz. We want to sound like one voice, not many voices, so you need to diminish your vibrato. You need to pull back. You need to make this thing sound sweet. When a band understands the fraction principle, it incredibly helps them in creating a great sound. And then I say for rehearsals, just another tip, use the phrase downbeat time. Don't tell people that rehearsal starts at 7 if you want to start playing the music at 7. Tell them that downbeat time is at 7. Then the electric guitar player will show up at 6:15 or 6:30 to get all their gear ready so they're ready for downbeat time. Finally, I say in a rehearsal, allow the band members time to practice their part in the song. Let them work on it so when you play as a band, you feel like you're succeeding and a moment of sweet music is created in that worship set that gives people a space to encounter God within.